And you also, I mean, you draw on science fiction, analytically, and maybe you could talk a little bit more about that. So we have one question here, which is, what is Franken-Education,
Oh,
and
yeah.
how has science run amok? I mean, this is a case of taking up science fiction and literature and using it as an analytical,
Yeah.
philosophical, not analytical philosophy, but analytical philosophical tool. And maybe you could talk a little bit about those themes and the importance of those themes and what you do.
So the concern within science fiction for the role of science is one that motivates me in terms of analysis of the sciences of education, or how, like behavioral sciences in particular, how they contribute to an attempt to create a particular kind of child subject, and how they might, if we think of the teacher or the school leader or the center head teacher or the policymaker, is always potentially going to end up in some kind of Victor Frankenstein role, where they want to produce this this perfection. They want to show they can create something that's a beautiful human, and what's likely to happen as a result. So I've been mainly concerned with using science fiction to tell a story about our anxieties in education, to produce a particular kind of subject, or to resolve a particular kind of problem. And that's become increasingly also influenced by a reading on, I guess, like control and predictability. So David Kupferman is really keen to continue writing about control societies as the ongoing projects, and we haven't had time to do it up till this stage. But everywhere it's popping up. So like during 3 weeks of recovery from COVID, I decided, like, I was going to try my hardest not to work, and found myself working through reading Dan Simmons's Hyperion and Endymion series, and in that it engages really thoroughly with the problem of a society that's determined to create a predictability godhead, that nothing is ever going to be left to chance. And I think, one way to get to that through a more traditional philosophy of education approach would be to read, for instance, Kurt Biester's The Beautiful Risk of Education, and is writing all about the problems of measurement societies. So for me, I've been engaged in, what goes wrong when you attempt to perfect things, and you believe that you can possibly predict and then control all potential educational outcomes. So that's one way. I mean, there's two ways I use it. So firstly, science fiction that engages with the Promethean problem, and then science fiction that engages with the algorithmic problem. Yeah, it's everywhere around us. And then it brings us back to Heidegger as well. And like he writes beautifully, I can't remember, sorry, in which text, about the curious excess of frantic measurement. And for me at the moment in Aotearoa, New Zealand, there's a real there's a real swell of that anxiety and excess, and it's led to investing in international programs for behavior management of children that try and detect and then eradicate behaviors that are considered to be like conduct disorder. So there was an attempt a few years back by the Ministry of Education to have a national screening of 4-year-olds for conduct disorder. I mean, there's the material where science fiction is going to offer us some kind of like play with where that's going to go. But it also helps, science fiction also helps to reveal what's under those kinds of anxieties. Fortunately, we resisted the national screening, but it's come up in new ways. Now we have social competence progress tools like seeping in. So every 3-year-old and 4-year-old is going to have to be observed and treated with social competence progress tools.
Well, there's an interesting tension between the fact that all colleges of education have to do that performative statement of values and their philosophy of education statements, but yet the administrative logics that prevail in many of these policies that are rolled out and then implemented and adopted are so instrumental, so guided by logics like the Frankenstein logic of the fantasy of being able to master nature and control it, predict it, et cetera, et cetera. So it's that seems to me somewhat of an interesting tension that can be easily sort of legitimated, narrated, justified in highly sort of progressive or humanistic language, but yet at its base is it's instrumental and so I find that somewhat interesting.
I mean, there's such a dislike of science fiction that it's actually quite a challenging approach. When I bring up science fiction in the class, it's not normally pretty effective. So I have to find ways of using science fiction, but not advocating for science fiction. In a lecture theatre of a couple of hundred, there might be 4 or 5 students who are already keen on science fiction. So they see this as an invitation and a release, and you can see them kind of light up and go, oh, I can do that. But the rest of the class, at least based on just visuals is like, what? Why are we doing this? Some of the ways that I experiment with this, and I've been talking with my great colleague Amy about this, is developing things like empathy tests as playful experiments around how to engage student teachers, not in science fiction, but in the sorts of questions that science fiction invites us to ask about. For instance, what is empathy, and how does a teacher show empathy? And should we take an instrumental approach to empathy so that we know that every teacher walks in with a definable and observable and measurable and accessible and developmentable, or whatever the word is, approach to their empathy. And so often the way I do that is by asking them how they feel about the possibility that an algorithm is going to eventually replace them as a teacher, and what they think that they bring that's not programmable, that's not codable. And so that gets the conversation going much better than if I talk to them about Blade Runner, or there's one of Philip K. Dick's novels, Martian Time Slip. There's the father of the child on Mars is reflecting on the benefits and costs of robot teachers. He's sitting on the fence in some ways, but also there's a melancholia for a past where the teacher was human. My question to the student teachers is, what's actually human about you in relation to your study? If your study is very technical and instrumental in terms of your center or classroom practice,